Dr. Tama Bryant.
Good morning. It is so good to see you, and we are showing up for another day, focusing on justice and joy. And I want to welcome you to our morning program, and we want to connect with each other. So just ask if you would turn to the person near you and say, "I'm so glad to see you." Doesn't that feel better? Yes. Building upon this year's convention theme, You Belong Here, over the next 50 minutes, we'll discuss the psychology of belonging, from nurturing and belonging in younger generations, protecting the rights of diverse, ethnic, and LGBTQ plus communities, and instilling a sense of belonging among immigrants. This conversation comes at a critical time in American culture as the nation grapples with incivility and marginalization of these populations. All of us need to belong somewhere. It is a basic need. It impacts our physical and mental health, brings together communities, and shapes our identity. From nurturing younger generations to protecting the rights of diverse groups, this state of being is critical to our nation as we grapple with incivility and a mental health crisis. What does psychological science say about belonging? And how can we as psychologists foster communities of belonging? I am delighted to say our theme here is so significant and timely. So if we can collectively say, "You belong here." And one more time, because you all sound a little sleepy. This time, okay, now we're up. You belong here. I'm delighted to welcome APA CEO, Dr. Arthur Evans, to moderate this timely conversation. Give him a warm welcome.
Good morning and welcome. We have a great audience here, but we also have a great audience online. As Dr. Bryant said, this is an important topic for us as a field, and it's certainly an important topic for us as an association. So we have three experts that are going to be talking to us about belongingness, about loneliness, and a great partnership that we have with Sesame Workshop that really allows us as psychologists to get the work of our field into the public with our youth. So let me introduce the first expert. She is Dr. Satya Maratha. She's the Director of Training at Over Zero and a contributor to the Belonging Barometer, the State of America of Belonging report that was just released earlier this year. Dr. Maratha's background is in stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination. Her research has broadly focused on understanding identity and group-based bias in education, healthcare, journalism, and public policy, and examining how best to counter this type of bias. So you start to lose dexterity as you get older, just letting you know. Okay. All right. Thank you. Dr. Maratha.
Hi, Dr. Evans. Thank you.
We're going to have a good time. All right. Very good. So first, let's talk about what is belonging. This is an area of your research. People probably have different ideas about what that means. From your standpoint as a researcher in this area, how do you understand that term?
Yeah, absolutely. So we define belonging as this constant assessment of our fit between the people that we're talking to and within our environment and our settings. Like as we go through our day, we're constantly getting cues and signals from our environment, whether it's the physical space, the conversations we're having, the norms and policies and structures. Those are all giving us an idea and these clues about whether or not this is a place that we fit and whether or not it's a place that we can belong. And it really captures a bunch of different components in terms like we did the Belonging Barometer, which captures social connectivity, psychological safety, and the ability to co-create as these big components of belonging.
Good. Talk to us about Over Zero. Why did you develop that? What is that about, and how does that fit with this topic?
Yeah, we get that question a lot because it seems a little bit random sometimes,
Yeah,
but it's not.
maybe tell us a little bit about the name, which is interesting.
Oh, over zero, I get to tell a math joke at a site conference. It means that nothing over zero can be divided. And we are a small nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works with leaders to help them to prevent, resist, and rise above political and identity-based violence in their communities. And so the Belonging Barometer happened because in the conversations that we were having with partners, we kept seeing that belonging and really a lack of belonging were showing up and contributing to the conflict dynamics and the tensions that we were observing in our work. And so we started doing our own research, and we really wanted to develop a measure that would allow us to get a nuanced picture of belonging that would be able to measure those three components I just mentioned, but that also was robust enough to track belonging across the different life settings that we find ourselves in. So like belonging with your friends and family might be different for you than in your workplace or in the local community or in the nation. And so we wanted it to be something that was short as well, so that it's only 10 items and we can re-deliver it over time as we come up with interventions and we can figure out how belonging is changing.
Good. So how do you really measure, get a handle on this issue? I think both at an individual level, but how do you think about it in terms of groups and organizations? Because particularly as an administrator, I have to think about these issues as someone who's over an organization. So are there differences in how you think about it from a group standpoint and from an individual standpoint?
Yeah, so with the group standpoint, it's really about the systems, because the individual is going to be a part of the group that is affected by the system that's in place. And so one of the examples I like to give is if you're using a tool like the barometer or like a staff satisfaction survey to understand how folks are feeling in the workplace, and maybe generally the workplace culture is pretty solid, people are pretty happy, but you start looking at the different groups, maybe you look at it by tenure, and you start to see that surprisingly, the people who've been there for a shorter amount of time are actually not reporting as much belonging. They're actually not experiencing it, which is kind of weird, because usually you start a job and you're enthusiastic and you're like, this is the best, and it's the older folks who are jaded. But you're seeing this and you're like, okay, well then what's happening here? And so then you can start having those really deep, candid conversations to understand, well, like, is it that you don't feel valued? Is it that you don't feel like you can make contributions, like you can't be your whole and authentic self? All these different components, and then you can start to make changes. And so maybe you find out with this particular example that they feel undervalued because they feel like they're not sure about like how promotions happen or how compensation is decided, and they feel like they get stuck, like there's no room for advancement. And so as a senior staff or as an administrative person, you can be like, well, what are my options? Like, it's actually kind of by design that the junior levels are going to kind of cycle out because there's turnaround built into the system. We would think they're gonna like go on to grad school or get a different job. We don't expect them to stay there forever. And so you could be more transparent. You could change the mechanism to be like, oh, well, like maybe make it a term position. Maybe not make them think that there's going to be room for advancement where none exist. And like explain that you're going to give them like, support finding the next thing. Or you can start thinking about other types of professional development, like what other kinds of advancement opportunities can you provide? What other kinds of like skills and training can you offer that would make them feel that you're as invested in them as they are in the organization?
Yeah. The report, one of the things we found at APA, we survey our staff quite often, and we find a lot of group differences. So we know that, for example, women of color experience our organization differently than other groups. People with disabilities experience our organization differently. In your research, how do those group differences sort of play out, both in terms of how people feel belonging, but also in terms of how you think about interventions to help people feel more engaged?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we think about it because the best predictor of belonging in our report was subjective socioeconomic status. And so folks who felt like they were doing better or doing at least average economically compared to those in their communities, they were reporting a greater sense of belonging. And so if I see that finding, I'm like, oh, well, it's not really like I can just do a training on this. It's not like I can just spread awareness. I need to think about the systems that are in place and the policies that I would need to shift so that even if I had like a great workplace that was awesome, or if I have a great school, if people aren't able to thrive there because there are these pressing concerns about whether or not they can like fit, just like kind of from an affordability standpoint, then that might limit their ability to thrive in that situation.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, you talked about organizations. If you were designing an organization that would be optimized for people feeling belongingness, how would you do that? What would the characteristics of that organization be?
Yeah, I'll speak from my personal experience. I would say that the organizations where I've been most able to see belonging manifest have been really intentional about the values that they have, and that those were co-created early on so that everyone can buy into, this is the culture that we're trying to create, and that they're flexible enough to adapt so that as the context changes, as the staff changes, they feel like they can provide input into those values, and that it's not something that just gets talked about during onboarding, but it's something that actually like we revisit all the time. And so like Over Zero, for example, has 6 values, and we talk about them all the time. We'll send out emails and be like, hey, can you review this report from like a do no harm standpoint, which is one of our values. We want to make sure the impact we're having is positive. Or like, hey, like in a meeting you come and you've got a heating pad and you're like tired. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm bringing my whole self today. Like I can still have the conversation, but like my back hurts. 30s are hard on us, like everything like that. So I think that it's really intentional about the space that you're creating, not just in terms of the values and virtues, but also like what does the physical space look like? Like what kinds of, one of the examples is like if you're trying to accommodate people with disabilities, but the doors are too heavy, like that is a literal physical barrier that's going to signal to someone that they don't belong, you know?
Interesting, yeah, yeah. Well, you know, a lot of people are working in remote environments right now. So as you think about people who are working in these remote virtual worlds, how does it change how you think about this issue of belongingness, and again, what kinds of things can we do intentionally to create more belongingness in those environments?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, so Over Zero is a fully remote organization. We are dispersed all throughout the country, and we just got our first kind of bi-coastal staff. And so I think that one thing is that we do really prioritize the in-person. And so it's, yes, we're fully remote, but we do travel, and we try to have these like in-depth, focused on relationship building, retreats at least twice a year, so that like we know each other in person, and so that when we can take that energy and that understanding of like, oh, like this is a communication style, oh, like this is the kind of jokes that they tell when we go back into our remote spaces. And so it's like, and I love working remotely, so but like I really do. But I think that having those in-person connections is really important because it's hard to pick up on those cues and signals that I mentioned earlier in a remote context. And so even having those, like we do onboarding in person. Usually the supervisor will go and meet with the supervisee for at least a week so that they really get the opportunity to know, like, this is how I do this, and like we can talk about it and you can see my mannerisms, because otherwise, like, I might be pretty animated. You might think I'm really intense online, and you see me in person, you're like, oh wait, no, she's just like a Gemini or whatever, you know?
All right, exactly. Well, you know, that's consistent with the research that shows that if you have a group to have your first meeting in person before you go into virtual, the groups tend to work better. Yeah. So we only have about 30 seconds left. So you're talking to a group of psychologists. What would you say to, particularly those who are clinicians, practitioners, how should they be thinking about, or things that they could do to incorporate this idea of belongingness in their work? What are some things that you might want to leave people with that they should focus on? Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's really about process. It's about either using something like the barometer or even just reading through the questions in the barometer to get an idea of the kinds of questions that you can ask so that you can get a feel for who's experiencing belonging, who isn't, and what can I do about it, and then keep revisiting those conversations because it's not like a one and done thing. What fosters belonging today might be different in 6 months, but fostering belonging is still going to be really important for everyone to thrive.
Can you all help me thank Dr. Murata for an excellent talk?
Thank you. Great talking to you.
So earlier this year, the U.S. Surgeon General released an advisory on loneliness and isolation in the United States and designated social connectedness as a public health priority. To help look at the connection between loneliness and belonging, please welcome Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad, social and health psychologist and lead scientific editor on the Surgeon General's advisory on our epidemic of of loneliness and isolation. Great, well, welcome.
Thank you.
Good. So, every time I hear the Surgeon General talk, he talks about this issue of loneliness. Talk about, for a moment, from your research, why is this so important, and particularly for people like us, many of whom are practitioners really trying to help people with their psychological well-being?
Well, I think it really stems down to the fact that humans are social beings. And so because of that, we function more optimally and thrive when we are with others. And so it's not surprising that when we lack social connection, it has such profound consequences that are far-reaching.
Yeah. The report that the Surgeon General did, and you were lead editor on, talk about what did that report say? What were the findings in that report, both in terms of what were some of the challenges, but then what are some of the things that were recommended in terms of addressing that?
Yeah, this was such an incredible honor and privilege for me to be able to work so closely with the Office of the Surgeon General on this. And they were very careful about wanting to make sure that this was based in evidence and drew significantly upon both the psychological science and interdisciplinary science. And I encourage everyone to read it.
It's a good report.
It's very rich with information, but there are a few key takeaways that I hope that people will get from this. And the first is that this applies to everybody. And it might be tempting to view this as perhaps an older adult issue or a Gen Z issue, but ultimately, really this impacts us all. And while some groups may face larger barriers to social connection, that in essence we can all thrive from social connection, but the consequences can be far-reaching when we do. And so because of that, of course, one of the key themes of this is that a whole of society approach is needed. The second main takeaway that I hope people get from this is that this is more than just an issue related to the pandemic. While, of course, this issue was heightened and many people suffered during the pandemic, and it raised awareness to this issue, we had concerning trends that Americans were becoming less socially connected. And this data dates back at least 2 decades, and some data dates back even more. So this is not new, and so simply getting back to normal is not going to be sufficient. The third key point that I hope people get from this is that this is more than just about loneliness, and that we can be disconnected from others in a variety of ways, from isolation to low social support or poor quality relationships. But it's also the profound benefits of being socially connected.
Yeah.
And that not just having people in our lives, but the functions that they serve and the quality of these relationships can help us thrive. And so that's another key point. Another key point is that this goes beyond just our mental health or our emotional well-being. We have very good evidence of the profound effects that it has on our physical health, including things like risk for heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and other chronic illnesses, cognitive health, and impacts our longevity and our lifespan. Another key point that I hope everyone gets from this is that this issue goes beyond just the individual. So of course, we often feel loneliness or satisfaction in our relationships. That can feel very personal. But oftentimes, the root causes of lacking social connection are in our communities or in society, or factors that exist outside the individual. And so what that suggests is that we need to have approaches that go beyond just individual-based approaches to address this issue. But it also points to the incredible data on the importance of connected communities. And that those communities that are connected can thrive. They have better population health, better economic prosperity, safety. And so our communities are better off when we are more connected. And then finally, the last key point that I would hope people get from this advisory is that this goes beyond just raising our awareness of this issue. It lays forth the first ever framework for a national strategy for social connection. And so this lays the framework for what we can do, like what are the steps that we can take moving forward to do something about this issue. And so it provides detailed stakeholder recommendations as well. So I know it was a lot.
No, that's great.
It's a rich document.
That's great. And well, let me ask you this. So what were some of the major findings? How big of a problem is this for the nation?
Yeah, so when we look at some of the data on the state of connection in the US, first off, I should just say it's complicated and it's nuanced because different studies measure it in different ways. But what some of these studies suggest is that, for instance, over the past 2 decades, Americans are spending more time in isolation, less time with friends and family and those in their community. Fewer people are joining groups, and more people are living alone. It's perhaps not surprising that, at least according to some estimates, it suggests that at least half of Americans are reporting that significant loneliness. And so these trends suggest not only that it may be that a significant portion of Americans may lack social connection, but that this issue is becoming worse over time.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the interventions. One of the things that you said, you said a lot of things that I really resonated with, but you know, the American Psychological Association has adopted a policy around population health, that we believe that if we want to, that our goals should be around achieving population health, not just mental health, but physical health. And you mentioned loneliness as an issue that affects our population health as well as our individual health. So can you talk a little bit about the interventions that we should be thinking about, both from an individual standpoint, but what are some of those interventions we should be implementing to achieve more population health?
Yeah, so there's, of course, a wide and rich literature that shows some interventions that can be done on individuals, done both interpersonally or in community-based settings. There's also research to suggest that interventions done in clinical settings, particularly medical settings, increases survival of patients. So one estimate suggests that those that receive some kind of psychosocial support in addition to standard medical care have a 20% increased odds of survival. And so there are these interventions that suggest that this can be improved at an individual level. But we also really need to invest more in prevention. And so we often have less success when we wait to try and solve a problem after it becomes severe. It's much more difficult and more expensive. And so we also need to be thinking about the kinds of prevention efforts. And so one recommendation that we have in this advisory is around including this in K through 12 health education and educating that. But of course also psychologists and other healthcare professionals can educate their patients. But we also need to think about systems level kinds of interventions, including policy.
Yeah. So I think that the takeaway that I got from what you just said is that if you're a clinician, we ought to be assessing for loneliness and disconnectedness, because we know that that is related to the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And as psychologists, we should be doing everything that we can to help educate the public on this issue. So thank you very much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Okay. Our third expert, please join me now in welcoming our next expert, Dr. Jean Bendecourt, who is the Senior Vice President for U.S. Social Impact at Sesame Workshop, the nonprofit organization behind Sesame Street. Dr. Bendecourt is trained as a bilingual speech and language psychologist and holds a doctorate in special education. She oversees the development of Sesame Workshop's domestic social impact initiatives designed to reach children, families, and key adults that influence young children's development and resilience. Dr. Bendecourt leads a team that develops those research-based initiatives in areas like children's social readiness, health equity, belonging and inclusion, traumatic experiences, resettlement, and emotional well-being. Dr. Bendecourt. Well, yesterday I mentioned the great partnership that we have with
I was delighted, Dr. Evans. Thank you so much. We could not do our work without this kind of partnership that we have. Thank you.
Well, we're excited to be in partnership with you, and I think one of the things that is very exciting is this ability, or this opportunity, I should say, to take what we know from psychological science and from our expertise as psychologists and share that with Sesame Workshop. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about how that process is going, how you think about it, and what you think some of the benefits of that are.
I will. The only thing I'm going to ask the audience is to be ready to take out your phones now. I know that sounds odd because at the end will be resources that you could scan, and the magic word is that they are for free. So phones out. But as you described, Dr. Evans, it is this wonderful ability as a global impact organization to combine media, research, and education to really meet the needs of the youngest children. And so in the area of particularly belonging, we are finding out that there's critical foundations that we need to establish. And part of that is, how do we celebrate children's own identity? But also keeping in mind, it's not the responsibility of just parents and caregivers, but rather it is within community and society. Tied with that is also the idea that when we are building children's identity, whether it's their culture, ethnicity, their race, their religion, spiritually, their identity, their sexual identity, with disabilities, all of those components, we must also look at emotional well-being simultaneously. And we've done a lot of research on what is the critical foundation of emotional well-being. What does every young child absolutely need? And we found that it is emotional awareness, nurturing connections, mind-body connection, and lastly, compassionate mindset, where we're setting a sense of joy and awe, and also hope for the future.
Yeah, so Sesame Street, the show,
Yes.
Doesn't do like many lectures on what you just said, right? So how do you work that into that format and get those messages across to children?
What's wonderful about Sesame Workshop is that all of you are very familiar with our programming, and we embed those strategies in our programming. But then we have our social impact, and that is an area where we actually create resources for parents, caregivers, and other providers. And we model these strategies, and in this case, we really started to highlight the area of not feeling alone. What is that concept? And we also changed the concept. Instead of saying, you are not alone, it's much more, we are not alone. But again, the responsibility that all together we need to come together. So I'd love to share a little video that we have.
Sure.
All right? Hold on, let's see. It worked when we practiced this. See, technology is not our friend. Even though I work with
Great.
No?
This is the barbershop. Now, I know that me and your mom used to cut.
That was it.
Myself, just out here on my own.
But here I am, and I'll take your hand. I'll walk right by your side and help you understand that you are not alone. I'll walk next to you.
I thought I was just one.
But now we both are two. And we're not alone. You walk here with me.
If Elmo walks along with you, together we are three.
And we're not alone. We walk hand in hand. We are stronger all together. And now we understand
That we're not alone. We are not alone. We are all your friends there. And when you need reminding, we will always be right there. And we're not alone. You're not alone.
Thank you. I hope that gives the feeling of collectiveness, of our responsibility that we all need to help our children be smarter, stronger, and kinder together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about messaging to children around these things, what's unique? What are the things that you've learned in your experience that really help you to effectively communicate some of these ideas and concepts?
Yes, we base everything from research, and we do it on a community level where we're hearing from parents, caregivers, and also what we call the circle of care. The circle of care for us are all individuals that influence young children's behavior. And we look at systems, for example, the healthcare system, the mental health system, the idea of early childhood, and the child welfare system. And that becomes generally that circle of care that we have in each community. Then we have another term that we actually use that we've added to the English lexicon. We sesamatize things. And in sesamatizing, what it means is that we take very difficult topics and we sort of adapt them so that the general public, parents, caregivers, everyone can use them easily. We also create the resources bilingually in English and in Spanish. But one of the strategies that we've known, particularly in building both identity and emotional well-being, is how do we capitalize on everyday experiences? Experiences that are really relevant to children and families connecting, and highlight the importance of those experiences. When it came to looking at identity, we did a couple of things. One was we explained melanin. Like, why, from a child's point of view, the typical question is often, why is my skin lighter or yours darker? What makes that difference? And the actual part of it is that there's a scientific reason. And so Elmo asked his dad, and also two new Muppets that we have, Wes and Elijah, and he explains melanin. Another instance that we did, and I'd love to show you a little bit of that work, is we took a very significant everyday moment, and that was Wes, our new Muppet, who is with his dad, and they are both Black Muppets. They're a Black family. And he is enjoying, his dad introduces Wes to the idea of the barbershop. And it's Wes's haircut. And it's such an incredible story of highlighting identity, culture, and also well-being and the strength of dads. I'm gonna show you a little part of it, and it's gonna cut off so that you could go back with those free resources and then see the whole thing. So let's try it and see if it works. Thank you.
Oh, you look so good with your new haircut. I feel great.
All right, and this is it. This is the barbershop. Wow. Now, I know that me and your mom used to cut your hair at home, but we both thought it was time to take you to the barbershop.
Wow. So this is the place you always talk about, the place you love, the place where you come to get a very special haircut.
That's right.
Wow. Oh, Dad,
Huh?
I want to get a very special haircut too.
Well, today's the day. All right, come on.
Hey, Elijah, how's it going?
You know what it is, sunny days. Oh, this is my son, Wes.
Oh, hi.
It's great to finally meet you. My name's Byron, and I'm your barber, but everyone calls me Fresh, because when I'm done cutting your hair, it will be fresh.
Oh, that means your haircut is gonna look good.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Take a seat.
Okay.
Wes, what can I do for you today?
I would like a very special haircut.
Excellent choice.
Can you make it short like my mom does?
I got you. I'll hook you up.
Oh, thanks, Fresh.
Let the very special haircut begin.
Let the very special haircut begin.
Hey, fellas. I just stopped by to watch the basketball game. The Parakeets are playing the Llamas.
Oh, wow. I love watching basketball. I didn't know it was something people did at the barber shop.
Yeah, watching sports together is something we do here.
Huh.
Okay. I know I left you in suspense. I'm so sorry. But if you watch the thing, it truly was a Muppet miracle to be able to show Wes's hair.
Yeah.
And then at the end, he has a beautiful haircut. But it's the incredible interaction that you see in the community and the importance of the barbershop for many of our Black and brown communities.
Yeah, well, as an African-American man, that is, yeah, I had a warm, fuzzy feeling just watching that.
Good.
There's
We're
a whole culture.
sesamatizing you.
No, there's a whole culture. That's right, I've been sesamatized. Yeah, there was a whole culture around Black
Yes.
barbershops. You know, one of the other things you talked about, melanin, at what age do kids start to detect those differences? When my kids were younger, my wife is lighter than I am. My daughter said, well, daddy's chocolate and mommy's caramel. So, you know, they start to pick up
Yes.
very early these differences and really trying to understand why are people different.
It's amazing. I think we often underestimate our young children. We think, A, that they're always resilient, and B, that they don't really understand a lot. The idea is that in terms of identifying differences, children start to pick up that around 2 years of age. And they start to note those differences. And that's why that opportunity to build identity through those nurturing connections, celebrating both our inside and outside, in the many ways that outside and inside are represented, is so critical. And having those kinds of discussions is just wonderful. Often parents, and we heard from our research, don't know how to respond. It's like, how do I describe different skin colors or other difficult questions? And that's why we use these resources to model those discussions in everyday moments, and also in ways that are fun and provide a way to be able to connect with what we call that circle of care. We also have resources in ways, as you were pointing out, Dr. Evans, that how do we reach the community? How do we reach individuals? We try to find where the gaps are every single moment. And what we find is that many of the topics that this community, your community deals with are very difficult. They're very difficult to explain. Everything from identity, we've also dealt with parental incarceration, community violence. How do you explain that to young children? And often we don't. And what happens is that then young children don't have that information or that sense of safety and comfort.
Well, I'm going to just say something about that, because I think that one of the things we assume, is, and the reason I gave that example, my child was very early when she picked up on, even that difference. And you're right, if we're believing as parents, as caregivers, that these are not differences that children are detecting, we're missing an opportunity to really help them understand their world better. But
absolutely,
I think that's an issue.
Absolutely. And also emotional distress. We also think that young children are so resilient that they're not experiencing emotional distress and not part of the mental health crisis. Yeah. And we know that they are.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. So I want to just go back to the last clip just for a second.
Yes.
What would you hope that young children would take away from that?
Oh my goodness. I think you said it as you were expressing it, that fuzzy feeling has a translation to a connection, a sense of joy, pride, familiarity, and having that opportunity to celebrate that and how special that is, and also highlighting dads, which I think is critical in our communities, the importance of dad and the positive connections. So all of those are easily modeled in an everyday moment that's often not celebrated from a young child's point of view.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a perfect way to end our conversation. Join me in thanking Dr. Betancourt, and thank you for the great relationship.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Something important out of today's discussion, wonderful experts. And remember that Cookie Monster is going to be here. Cookie Monster is in the house. Might even be around here somewhere. So make sure you get your picture. And I know if you have young children, you will be the bomb diggity with your kids. You come home with a picture with Cookie Monster. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you for being here.